All right, good evening. Today we're going to discuss, I think, a hot button topic, something that we know too well, and that is called Jewish guilt. Anyone familiar with that term, Jewish guilt? So, all right, many of us grew up with parents, a mother, a father, grandmother, grandfather, that drilled into us this idea of Jewish guilt. And we're going to try to address this idea of Jewish guilt and see how it applies to us and what we can learn from it. What I would like to address today is, I'm sure we've all seen some of the Woody Allen movies where he talks about the idea of guilt. But today we're going to focus on the positive aspect of guilt. Okay? Can you imagine such a thing? That guilt can be a positive thing? We almost run away from whoever makes us feel guilty. But the truth is that there is such an idea of positive guilt. For example, some kind of negative guilt. We'll start with that. How many parents go through life feeling guilty that the reason why their child turned out the way they turned out was because when he or she was 8 years old and they asked for a bicycle and we couldn't afford to give them the bicycle, and they didn't want to talk to us since then, right? So we feel guilty our whole life that they turned out like that because of the fact that we didn't get them that gift. That could be a possibility. Or maybe my kids grew up so disturbed or so angry or so whatever because I didn't go on enough vacations. I spent too much time at work. Millions of different things that we could blame ourselves on for things that we probably did not really contribute to, but we, in a way, think of ourselves as being this all-powerful being, that because of my mistake or my harsh words, this and that result happened as a result of that. So we have to talk about this idea of guilt. So the first thing is Jewish guilt is hardwired into our Jewish soul. We can't get rid of it. That's the fact. That's the reality. It's programmed into our spiritual DNA. The question is, how will it blossom in our life? In other words, will it surface as a neurotic, debilitating, pessimistic way of living? Or will it blossom in a way of empowering our confidence in our ability to affect true change in our lives and in the lives of our fellow human beings? In other words, does the guilt inhibit our growth, or does it contribute to our growth? And that's the essential question. Think about it. Why does your grandmother make you feel guilty that you walked outside without a coat? Right? Why do they do that? Why do they make you feel guilty that you didn't eat all the food on your plate? So the reality is that they make you feel guilty and you feel very sad about it. But the question is, what does that do to you? Does it motivate you next time you go outside to wear a coat, or next time you eat to finish your whole plate? Or does it discourage you from doing it, say, you know what, I'm never wearing a coat, or I'm never finishing my plate? So the question is, what does the guilt do for us? Does it motivate us to help us to blossom into a better human being? Or does it cause us debilitating feelings and cause us not to be successful in life? And that is what we're going to address today. What I think is a fascinating insight into the Jewish understanding of the concept of guilt, where it comes from, and how we could utilize it as a tool to better our lives and to live a more fulfilling and more enriched life. So there's a story that is told of Rabbi Soloveitchik, that his grandchild, it's a story about Rabbi Twersky, who's a famous psychologist in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he says that his grandchild was once misbehaving, and so he turns to his grandchild and he says in two Yiddish words, "Sepas nicht," which means it's not befitting to you. He didn't say what you're doing is wrong, that you should stop doing that. He said, for you, it's not befitting to behave in that manner. Was he implying that his son should feel guilty as his grandson, as a result of what he did? Or did he use those words to empower him and to think about how he was conducting himself? So many times, if you want to behave in a certain way, let's say in an improper way, okay? What do we do to tell ourselves not to behave in that manner? Sometimes we tell ourselves, it's not befitting to me in the position that I hold in a company to say this and this thing to my coworker, okay? Or it's not befitting for me in the position of the family structure that I have to wear this type of shirt or get this type of haircut or whatever it is. And so the question is, what is this idea that helps me overcome a potential negative behavioral conduct? According to Judaism, that idea is called, in a Hebrew word or an English word, it's called guilt. Okay? I'm not doing it because it doesn't befit this type of personality. Now, sometimes it can say, it's not befitting to me not to say something. If I see somebody misbehaving, I have to stand up and say something. Because if I don't say something, I will feel guilty later for not standing up for what was right. So in this case, the guilt is actually motivating me to encourage others to live a better life. So we see that guilt is not necessarily a bad or negative thing. Guilt can actually be a positive thing. In the Woody Allen movies, they're typically depicted as negative things. We go home crying because someone yelled at me and I feel guilty or whatever it is. But the truth is, and that's what we're going to talk about today, the Jewish perspective is totally different. That it actually can be an incredibly powerful tool. And that is how I would like to start today. There was once someone who came to the Lubavitcher Rebbe and said that he has a problem that he likes to eat. And he's quite large, he's a pretty big guy, 6'3" or whatever he was, and he liked to eat. And he came to the Rebbe, he said, Rebbe, what should I do? It's not healthy for me, I'm overweight. What should I do? How can I tell myself that I should stop to do it? Every diet I went on didn't help. The Rebbe said, he was a rabbi of a community, the Rebbe said, every time you want to take an extra snack that's not good for you, tell yourself that it's not befitting for the rabbi of your community to do that. They need to have a healthy rabbi that's there for them, that's going to live long for them. And tell yourself, as my position in this community, it's not befitting for me to go and to eat that extra bag of chips. Okay? So, if a person feels guilty after they do, let's say somebody does something, okay? So what I first mentioned is feeling guilty before we do it. It's not befitting for me to say this thing, or it should motivate me to do something. So that's a guilt before I actually go ahead and do it. We have another type of guilt, and that comes after I did this thing. After I did something, now I feel guilty that I did it. So now we have to ask ourselves, why do I feel guilty that I did it? Where does that guilt come from? Is it coming to make me feel good, or is it coming to make me feel bad? Is it coming to me in order to encourage me to do it again or not to do it again? And when we think about it in those terms, we can come to the realization or come to the conclusion that it will actually, hopefully, help me not to do that bad thing again. But if I feel guilty of the fact that I just did it, and as a result of that, I feel depressed, what's the chance that I'm going to be motivated next time? Right? In other words, if I did something wrong, yeah, and I feel guilty about it, if it motivates me to ask for forgiveness, then it's a good guilt. If it motivates me to be, or it doesn't motivate me, dismotivates me, and I'm embarrassed to show my face again, then that's a sign that that's coming from a bad place. It's a bad guilt. In other words, let's say we meet somebody and we tell somebody a nasty thing. You know, you see someone that puts on a nice dress and you tell them, oh, that dress is ugly. It just came out. You didn't want to say it, it just came out. So you feel guilty about it. Sometimes we feel so guilty about it, we're embarrassed to hang out with that person again because we did something wrong. Not they didn't do anything wrong. I did something wrong, but because of I did wrong, I'm embarrassed to continue that friendship. And we break up that friendship as a result of that thing. So that guilt obviously is coming from a bad place. But if I feel guilty and it motivates me to call up the person and say, hey, you know what I said yesterday, I'm really sorry for saying that. I didn't mean that. That's coming from a good place. So we see that same exact feeling can actually have a positive impact or a negative impact. So by us understanding what it is, it'll help us better deal with that feeling, and we can redirect it to where we feel it's best. And that's the key. That's why I feel it's important to talk about it tonight. The first stage that Judaism talks about this idea of guilt is where it's related to the concept of Teshuva. Teshuva means repentance. What constitutes Teshuva? That the person who Teshuva means that a person regrets what they did. What constitutes this idea of regret is that the person should abandon that behavior that they did and resolve not to do it again. Okay? Or to be more precise, there's actually 3 levels in the idea of Teshuva. Number 1, identify and admit what I did was wrong. Okay? Number 2, commit not to do it again. And number 3, to have remorse over what was done. Admit my behavior, my negative behavior, commit not to do it again, and feel bad that I did it. When we have these 3 stages, the chances are we will not repeat that behavior. In the history of the world, let's just go back 300 years ago, or 250, 300 years ago. There were people that were known as Magidim, preachers. These preachers would travel from city to city and give these fire and brimstone speeches that would motivate the communities and cause these people to cry and to beg God for forgiveness. I mean, these speeches were so powerful that it would literally light the fire in anybody's heart and cause them tremendous amount of remorse and guilt and everything. And this would motivate them to change. The Baal Shem Tov came about and he says, wait a second. These fire and brimstone speeches are very powerful, and many people do change as a result of that. But many more people are turned off because of it. The fire and brimstone speeches are too strong. They're too debilitating. They're too depressing that most people cannot deal with it.
Okay.
Therefore, Baal Shem Tov came about and says, we're going to change the conversation. And instead of talking about how guilty a person should feel, we should talk about how much love they have in their heart and how much they could connect to God through joy and through love. Let's expound upon this for a moment, okay? Does God want us to feel bad of the things that we did? Or does God want me to be excited of the things that I did? Let's say in 1 hour, I did a good thing and I did a bad thing, okay? Let's say in 1 hour, I said a beautiful thing to someone and I said a nasty thing to someone. The second hour, what's regurgitating in my head? Is it the thing that I said that was not nice to that person? Or is it the nice thing that I said to that person? I believe that human nature is that we think about the not nice thing that I did. That regurgitates the whole time. Or let's say we made a mistake. Something we shouldn't have done. We did it, whatever. We did a good thing and we made a mistake. What do we rehash over and over and over again? Typically, it's the bad thing, the negative thing. Why? Why not focus on the good thing? We equally did a good thing that took 5 minutes and a bad thing took 5 minutes. Why do we regurgitate the bad thing? So the Baal Shem Tov says 2 things. First of all, stop focusing on the negative thing. Of course, if you said something not nice to someone, you have to ask forgiveness and correct it, absolutely. But don't focus on it more than that. And focus on the joyful thing, the thing that brings you happiness. And when we do that, we will end off living a life with joy instead of a life of guilt. But why is that important? The Baal Shem Tov said it's important not for the first hour, but for the third hour. Because if you walk around regurgitating the thing that caused you to beat yourself up over what you did, you will be unable to go out of your house. You'll be unable to pick up the phone again. You'll be unable to conquer, to accomplish what you need to accomplish. Because you're too controlled by this negative thought. Therefore, the Baal Shem Tov says that you know where this guilt is coming from? It's not coming from a good place. It's actually coming from a very negative place. And that negative place is called, in Hebrew, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. A person has a good inclination and an evil inclination. The good inclination causes them or encourages them to do good. The evil inclination causes them or encourages them to do bad. When the person is feeling guilty, the bad inclination is saying, great, I have you in my hands. Because now you're not going to do good anymore. You know why you're not going to do good? Because you're going to be afraid that while you're doing good, you're going to do something bad. And I'll be honest, I'm the same way. Many times, at first, I was very intimidated to give a class. And I'm still very nervous to give a talk in a synagogue or even a live Zoom. I'm serious. I'll tell you why I'm nervous. I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing, saying the incorrect thing. Have I said the wrong thing in the past? Absolutely. But I tell myself that I said 99% good things, and maybe one thing I shouldn't have said. And so I have to correct that one thing. Absolutely, I shouldn't do it next time. But I can't allow that 1% not to let me give another class, or not to let me meet other people, or pick up the phone and cold call someone, because I may say something wrong. Because that 1% is coming from the evil inclination, who doesn't want you to be successful, doesn't want you to grow. And you know how he comes to, you know how he causes us, I'll give you a perfect example. This is something people tell me all the time. Rabbi, do you know why I don't come to the synagogue? Because I don't know what to do in the synagogue. I'm embarrassed that I don't know how to say the prayers. I don't know how to hold the prayer book. I don't know if I should stand. I don't know if I should sit. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing or not. So what does it do to the person? Does it encourage them to come, encourage them not to come? It encourages them not to come. So let me ask you, is that coming from a good place or from a bad place? Right? Or another thing people say, I don't observe this specific commandment because I don't know if I'm doing it right. And so because I don't want to do it wrong, therefore I'm not doing it. So I ask you, don't you think God would be happier if you do it, even if you do it wrong, than not to do it at all? Of course God would be happier to do that. And so that's what the Baal Shem Tov came about. When these preachers came about, they came in this fire and brimstone and said, what you're doing is wrong, you're not doing it right, do it this way. So what did people feel? They said, forget it. They threw up their hands. They said, forget it, I'm no good. Baal Shem Tov said, no, you're amazing. What you're doing is fantastic. Could you do it better? Everybody can do it better. But you're unbelievable. When you type in an email address, you need to get every letter right, or else it's not going to go to the right person. Even the dot, a little tiny dot has to be there, or else it's not going to be sent. It's going to go to someone's spam. But in Judaism, it's not like that. In Judaism, even if you say something a little bit wrong, it's okay. There's a story that is told of a great woman, a very righteous woman, who every day she would read the book of Psalms. But every day she would read it incorrectly. She didn't know how to read perfectly, and so she would make mistakes in the pronunciation of the words. And her grandson saw her every single day saying the same book of Psalms. So he told his grandmother, he says, do you know why you don't know the book by heart? Because every day you make new mistakes, so every day you're reading a new book. It's a different book every day because it's new mistakes. So she felt terrible. So she went to her husband, who was also a very righteous, holy Jew, and she told him what, our grandson said. So her husband told her, he says, you should know that the angels on high wait every day to hear you saying the Psalms. Because she said, maybe I should stop to do it because I'm doing it wrong. So he says, every day the angels wait for you to say the Psalms. They love the Psalms that you say, even with the mistakes. Those are the most beautiful Psalms. You know why? Because they're coming from the depths of your heart. You're saying it from the purity of your soul. So if we're going to stop to pray because we don't do it exactly right, we're not going to observe the Shabbos because I can't do it exactly how I should do it, it's called Jewish OCD. And many Jews have this problem, for real. We have an obsessive compulsive disorder, and we're so meticulous in how everything has to be done, has to be said exactly like this, that we can't function as a Jew. The Baal Shem Tov said, no, don't worry. It's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. Do your best. In other words, don't allow the guilt to stop you from doing what you need to do, even if it's imperfect. It doesn't matter. 99.9% is good. That's beautiful. That's what Hashem wants. That's what God wants. And this brings us to point out what we spoke about last week. If a person thinks about this in this manner, how will they live their life? Will they live their life with joy or depressed or sadness? And I can guarantee you they will have much more joy in their life when we think about serving God in this manner. And this was the mission that the holy Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, wanted to accomplish. He says, we got to serve God with joy, with happiness. Because when we do that, we can accomplish 1,000,000 times more. And so, if one is feeling that they don't want to say something, they don't want to meet somebody, because the last time they spoke to that person, they may have said something wrong, what do we have to do? Recognize where it's coming from and allow it to motivate us to make amends with that person, to ask for forgiveness, or to enhance our relationship with that person, not to allow it to cause us to feel depressed. Because that's exactly what the evil inclination wants. It wants us to feel guilty. And so I ask you, What's more dangerous for the person? Depression or guilt? Depression is worse. Guilt can actually be a motivating factor. Because if we redirect the guilt to the right way, we can see how it could positively motivate us. How could it, now let's talk about how it can positively motivate us, or how we can redirect the guilt. So there's such a thing, as we mentioned earlier, as good guilt and bad guilt. Okay? Let's say you're driving in your car, just mindlessly driving home. Okay? And all of a sudden, you remember, oh, I said this and that to that person, or I did this and that and the other to the other person. Or you playing sports, you're playing basketball, or playing golf, or riding your bike, whatever you were doing, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this thought hits you. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. How did I do that? Is that a good guilt or a bad guilt? That's a bad guilt. Of course it's a bad guilt. Do you know why it's a bad guilt? Because it's just trying to make you feel depressed. That's it. All it wants to do is make you feel depressed. How about if you're in the middle of praying or in the middle of studying something and you have that thought, oh, can't believe I did that. I can't believe I said that. I can't believe I forgot to do that. I can't believe I forgot to call my mother on her birthday. I forgot to call whatever it is. I can't believe it. You're in the middle of praying and you have that thought. Is that a good guilt or a bad guilt? That's also a bad guilt. Do you know why? Because what should you be doing now? Now you should be focusing on your prayers, on your studies, not thinking about anything else. So what then is a good guilt? Or better yet, how can I create or how can I have a positive guilt? But first I want to focus a little bit more on understanding how we can identify what a bad guilt is. And in simple terms, a bad guilt is when it comes into our minds, into our hearts, uninvited. When we didn't ask for it and it just comes out of left field, that is a sign that it's uninvited and we should not pay any attention to it. That's a sign that that's a bad guilt. Okay? What then is a good guilt? A good guilt is when I sit down and I begin to make a calculation. And I think about, okay, today I met all these people. How did I conduct myself with all these people? Did I speak to them nicely? Was I respectful? Was I helpful? We go through the whole list. This person I was, this person I wasn't. This person I was extra good, this person not so good. Now, when I sit down and I introduce this guilt to me, what am I doing with that guilt? What am I going to do with that guilt? The chances are I'm going to correct it. Because I'm sitting down in a meticulous manner and I'm saying, okay, I met with Mr. John today, but I said something not nice. So tomorrow I'm going to call him up and apologize. Or today I sent an email and I didn't address the email the way I was supposed to. I'm going to respond in a different email or rewrite the email that I sent in a nicer manner. When it comes uninvited, the chances are that it's just going to make us feel bad. Forget it. You feel all your ear was sucked out of you, right? You ever felt that? All of a sudden you're feeling good. All of a sudden you feel deflated. And there's nothing you can do about it because you don't have a pen to sit down and write it down. And the chances are 10 minutes later you forgot what that was. And now you're feeling guilty that you forgot. And you can't even talk to your spouse. You can't talk to anyone because you're just completely, mind is full of these thoughts that are going through your head. But when you sit down and meticulously write it down or introduce the guilt to what you are going through, the chances are you will correct whatever you did, whatever you said, whatever happened. Many times people think, oh, if I'm in the middle of praying, I'm doing something holy, and I think about, I failed God this week. So that must be a good feeling, right? That must be the right thing, because I'm in the middle of praying. That's how I should feel. The founder of the Chabad movement, the Alter Rebbe, says, no, you didn't invite it to come into your thought. It's not a good thought. It just wants to encourage you not to concentrate on your prayers. So sit down when you have time, when you have the mind to think about it, and write it down. And the Alter Rebbe, his name is Rav Shneur Zalman, he gives us 5 things that we should do in order to introduce guilt, so to speak. Okay? Number 1, have a set time. Maybe before you go to sleep, maybe when you wake up, whatever works for you. Probably best not when you wake up because you want to start off in a positive manner, but whatever. He said have a set time. Number 2, start it off by thinking peacefully about God's greatness and how kind God is to you. Let's get excited about life. Get excited about God. Number 3 is the guilt and the resolution not to do it again. Right? So make sure that when you do introduce, when you do think about it, the outcome should be that I don't want to do it again. Okay? Number 4, that a person should introduce his guilt is that the ability to cut the feelings of guilt and let it go. I didn't call my mother on her birthday. I feel bad about it. I thought about it. I will call her tomorrow to apologize. And that's it. I forgot about it. It's not sitting on my chest anymore. Next year, will you forget your spouse's anniversary? Maybe. It may happen 10 years in a row. Could be. But that's not the point. The point is, right, don't let it linger and cause you not to be able to function as a functioning human being. Correct it, fix it. Number 5, the Alter Rebbe says, to have the faith that because you went through this process, you're back on track with God. God, did I disappoint you? Maybe. Very possible I disappointed you. I feel guilty about it. I'm not going to do it again. But I'm not even going to feel guilty anymore. Because that guilt is not good. It's not motivating me to do more. Think about it like this, okay? Like an alarm system. We have the alarm system in our house. The alarm system is there in order to let us know if there's a burglar coming in or intruder coming into our house. What happens if the alarm keeps on tripping, keeps on going off? We get pretty annoyed. What happens if our monitoring company keeps on calling us every time the alarm goes off by mistake? We get really annoyed. What happens if every time our alarm goes off, the police show up because they got an alert that your alarm went off and it's a false alarm? You get really annoyed. And you just get frustrated and get upset. But what happens if you're testing your alarm system to see if it's working? Are you annoyed? Not at all. If your company calls you up, the monitoring company calls you up to see why the alarm went off, are you upset? Not at all. If the cops show up because they heard the alarm go off, they got an alert, are you upset they showed up? You're very thankful that your alarm is working the way it's supposed to. So the guilt is the same thing. If it comes uninvited, we see it as an alarm going off, as a false alarm. But if we introduce it, we see it as a welcoming thing. Guilt is working. Do we have Jewish guilt? Yes, it's in our DNA. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's actually could be a very positive thing. It can be a good thing. And so what is guilt? Guilt is like an alarm system. It's there because we need it to protect us from when we do something wrong, but it's not there to disturb us and to control us. It's there to motivate us and to set us in the right track. So The Alter Rebbe introduces this idea in the book of the Tanya. In fact, he dedicates 2.5 chapters of the 53 chapters of this book called the Tanya. 2.5 chapters are dedicated to this concept of guilt. So spiritual challenges should lead us to joy, not to guilt. Because guilt on its own can actually be depressing. And it should lead us to joy. That is really where we want to go. So let's talk about a very deep, yet powerful and fundamental Jewish concept. You ready? This is the Jewish idea. That God does not judge us upon our thoughts, only upon our actions. We may have had a negative thought, but if we didn't act on it, no harm, no foul. You didn't do anything wrong. The problem many times is that we have a bad thought, we let the bad thought linger in our mind, and it leads us to bad action. That's true. So we have to therefore kick that thought out of our heads. Because the thought can lead to action if it's wrong. But if it remains in thought and we have that thought and we kick it out, we didn't do anything wrong. My trainer always tells me, he says, if you're walking on the street and a bird hits you in the head, are you at fault? No, absolutely not. You're walking, the bird hit you on the head. If you're like Elaine in Seinfeld, a bird will hit you on your head because she had a big head. I don't know if you know that Seinfeld episode. The whole show is funny. That's a funny episode. Anyway, so if you're walking on the street and a bird hits you on the head, you did nothing wrong. If you're walking on the street and the bird lands on your head, did you do something wrong? Probably not. But if you're walking on the street and the bird lands on your head and builds a nest on your head, did you do something wrong? Chances are, yeah, it's your fault. Not wrong, but I'm saying, is it your fault? Chances are, yeah. What's the difference between the bird just hitting you in the head, landing on your head, or building a nest? Very simple. When you have a bad thought about someone or an unholy thought, it's like a bird hit your head. You can't be blamed. We live in a world, we see things and it causes us to think things. But if you let the bird land on your head, you let that thought linger in your head, okay, maybe it's wrong, maybe not. We can argue that thought. We can argue with that. But if you allow that thought to sit in your head and to build a nest, now it's your fault. Thought itself, you're not going to be held guilty. It's the action that counts. But we don't want to let even negative thoughts linger in our head. Let it bit long enough that it can build a nest. Do you know why? I can almost guarantee you, if we don't like someone, let's say, the first impression we don't like them, and we think about it, the more and more and more, we're going to not like the person even more, even more, even more. Till we concoct such a big story about that person that probably never happened, but we thought about them so much in a negative way, we can never come to befriend them. But the chances are, if we think about that person in a positive way for a long time, we'll really get to know them. We'll get to love them even more. I thought is a powerful thing. So we have to know, will we allow the thought to sit in our mind and build a nest or not? And so the Alter Rebbe says, if it's a bad thought, we have to push it away. And he also says a very powerful thing. Do you know who has negative thoughts? Only the righteous. If you're doing something good, you're going to have a bad thought. But God gave us the tools to push it away. And he says when you push it away, push it away with two hands. Don't just push it away with one hand. Let's take, for an example, let's take jealousy, okay? I'm jealous that my neighbor got a nice car. But I know that jealousy is a bad thing. It doesn't lead to anything positive. It's wrong to be jealous. If I let that jealousy to linger, will I like my neighbor more or less? Probably less. Because the more we're going to build up this, hate is a strong word, but our dislike to our neighbor that they got this nice car and I don't have that car. Okay? So what do we have to do? We have to push that thought out of our head. If it's jealousy, jealousy is not a healthy conduct, not a healthy way to live. We have to push it away. We push it away with both hands. If we push it away with one hand, the chances are that in our heads, we're also embracing or pushing it away, but I kind of like it. I kind of want to let that thought linger in my head. Okay? So how do we live a healthier life? Alter Rebbe says, and this is this idea, we're not going to be judged by our thoughts. We're going to be judged by our actions. But we have to do what we can to make sure that our actions are pure and our actions are good. If we are going to allow the thoughts to linger in our head, it may lead us to unfortunately negative actions. Because when we are jealous of someone, it's just one example, or even anger, or whatever the negative feeling is, and we let it sit, and we regurgitate it over and over and over again, we just feel worse, and we want it more, and sometimes it leads us to trying to get it in an unhealthy manner, in the wrong manner. So therefore, what do we have to do? We have to push it away with two hands, get rid of it. And he says like this, push it away with both hands. How do we do that? By simply ignoring it. Don't judge yourself. Don't think, how did I think of it? I must be such a bad person. He says, no, get rid of that guilty feeling. Get it all out of your head. Stop thinking about it. Fill your head with something positive, something good. Don't let it sit because it's just going to pull you down and make you sad. And if you're feeling sad, it's not going to let you grow. It's not going to let you mature. It's not going to let you be happy. It's not going to let you serve God better. So if that's the case, I ask you, why do we have these feelings of guilt? Why did God put into our DNA? If we have to push it away with both hands, why did he even introduce it to us in our DNA? If I sit down at certain times to do it, fine. Then I can, but why should it come uninvited? And the answer is, Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, this book in the Tanya, that it actually, the struggle that we have to push it out makes us stronger. When we have to deal with the thoughts that are going into our head, those voices that we continue to hear, and we are able to push it out and overcome them, we end up being much stronger. In fact, scientists did a study in the patterns of the brain, and they saw that every thought that a person has causes a series of neurons to be fired together. Almost like solders different neurons together. And so the more thoughts we have, the more we have to deal with these thoughts, it just causes more of these neurons to stick together. Meaning to say, it causes our brain to get stronger and more powerful. So when we have to deal with the real tough questions, we have the power to do it. We have the know-how to do it. We have the experience because we can now do it. We've overcome many challenges. We can overcome this one too. And this, of course, takes a lifetime of work. It doesn't happen in a minute, but we can certainly accomplish it and master it. And this guy once came to the Mazutra Magid, and I'm going to conclude with this story. He came to the Mazutra Magid and he said, Rebbe, How can I make sure that these negative thoughts or these disturbing thoughts don't come into my head? Before I say the rest of the story, I'll say another story. It's another story that this guy had a court case of trumped up charges against him. So he came to the rabbi. He says, "Rabbi, please tell me, what should I do about these charges?" So the rabbi said, if the prosecutor says this and that, you should say this and that. So the guy said, what's the prosecutor says this and the other? So the rabbi said, then you should say this and that. So the guy said, what's the prosecutor says the next thing? So the rabbi said, then say this. And he said, what's the prosecutor says the other thing? So the rabbi said, say that. And he went on and on and on. So at one point, the rabbi said, when he said, what's the prosecutor says that? So the rabbi said, the prosecutor's not going to say that. He says, what do you mean? How do you know that? So he says, very simple. The reason why you're thinking of all these possible scenarios is because you pray every day. And when you pray, your mind begins to wander. I don't know if it ever happened to you. You ever tried to pray? Did you ever start thinking about everything that happened, every potential business client that you could have met, or everything you could have done, every store you should have gone to, every sale that you missed? It happens to me all the time. When the moment I stand up to pray, all of a sudden my mind starts to go everywhere. Happens. We're human. So they ever said, don't worry, the other person doesn't pray. You don't have to worry about it. They're not going to think about all these possible scenarios. So back to our story. So this guy came and he said to Mazutra Magid, he says, how can I get all these thoughts, keep them out of my head? Mazutra Magid said, go to this and this chassid and this town and ask him. And so he went to the town and he came to the chassid. He knocked on the door. He was late at night already. It's middle of the winter. He knocked on the door and the guy didn't answer. So he went to the back. He saw the window that the light was on and the guy was in the study. So he went back to the front door, started knocking louder. The guy didn't answer. So he started to knock even louder. The guy didn't answer. For an hour, he's banging and banging. The guy did not open the door for him. It's freezing cold at night, but the guy's not opening. So he sat down on the guy's front steps and he fell asleep. In the middle of the night, the guy opens the door and he says, oh, my dear friend, come inside. The guy was half frozen. He says, let me warm you up. Come sit by the fire. Here's a hot tea. And she's so nice to him. He's giving him food and hot drink, and he's being so kind to him. After the guy was revived, he says, I don't understand. You didn't hear me knocking? He says, I heard you knocking. He says, what are you doing over here? Why did you come to my house? So the guy said, well, I'll tell you the truth. I asked the Mazutra Magid, the Rebbe, how do I get the thoughts out of my head? And he said, I should come to you. So the guy said, I already answered your question. So what do you mean? How did you answer my question? He said, you remember? You knocked on the door. I didn't let you in. So the guy understood what message he was saying. When someone knocks on your door, if you let him in, that means you're letting him in. You're voluntarily letting that thought come into your head. You don't want that thought to come into your head? Close the door. Don't let it in. That's it. As simple as that. Does it come into our head sometimes? Absolutely. That's why the Alter Rebbe gives the tool to push it out. We may not be on that level not to let it to come into our head, but that's the goal. Don't open the door for that negative thought, for the jealousy, for the anger, whatever the thought is, whatever the not good thing is, that's not letting us be joyous, not letting us serve God. That is called bad guilt. So is Jewish guilt a good thing or a bad thing? In conclusion, it's an excellent thing if we use it in the proper way, if we introduce it in the proper way. And then it'll help us not only be successful, it'll help us grow and love God and serve God with joy and happiness. With that, I bless you that you should not feel guilty. You should only have joy and blessings in your heart. Thank you very much. It's wonderful to see you tonight and look forward to seeing you next week. Don't forget, Wednesday night, please join us on the same Zoom, exactly the same number. We're having a incredible evening with the international speakers at 7 o'clock. So please join us for that, or maybe 7:30. You see the email? I'll send you the message. So please join us for that international speaker Wednesday night. I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Also, let me know if you like.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Let me know if you want me to introduce some text-based stuff like last week, or is this better? Whatever.
Oh, I like